Hey, Faith Community. We are back with another devotional, working our way through the New Testament. Today we are in Acts chapter 22. Yesterday, Clint and I talked through Acts 21. Paul has his mind set to go to Jerusalem. There's nothing that's going to stop him, even the threat of imprisonment or death. And sure enough, Paul gets to Jerusalem. He's proclaiming the gospel, preaching the gospel. He gets arrested. And so now in Acts chapter 22, we get to see Paul have some words. Like he gets to make a defense before the people. And one of the things that I think is cool about Paul's defense is that he really makes it about the gospel, right? He makes it about his testimony, which is something that you can't argue with, right? If someone is asking you, hey, why do you believe what you believe, and you share with them your testimony, like this is who I once was, this is the direction I was headed, this is what my destiny was going to be, but thank God he intervened, right? He intercepted my life. He altered the direction of my life. He opened my eyes. He allowed me to see. He adopted me as his son or his daughter, and he put me on the path of righteousness. And now my life is so much more full. It's so much more complete. There's a joy that no matter what circumstances I'm going through that cannot be taken from me. Who can argue with that, right? Who can say, no, you don't have a joy that is made complete. Like you're not able to go through this. And Paul is recounting his testimony. He's talking about him seeing the resurrected Christ, what that did for him, how it changed his life. And yet we see that as we're proclaiming the gospel and as we're sharing our testimony, it doesn't always end with thunderous applause and standing ovations and saying, well done, you're doing so great, you've convinced us all to become Christians. The gospel of Christ is offensive to sinful hearts. And so we see after Paul shares his testimony, it says in verse 22, they listened to him up to this point. Then they raised their voices, shouting, wipe this man off the face of the earth. He should not be allowed to live. So here's Paul doing the right thing, proclaiming the gospel, sharing his testimony, giving, a defense that you can't argue against. And yet they say, forget it. Let's not try to reason. We can't do that. Let's instead just kill him, right? We don't like what he's saying. We can't dispute what he's saying, but we don't like it. Let's just kill him. And then we see that now you have the whole crowd is worked up. They're yelling, they're flinging aside their garments, they're throwing dust into the air. And yet Paul, because he's a Roman citizen, is not put to death, right? And so here we have this evidence in the midst of this where, one, Paul is doing the right thing, and what we might think logically should happen, that he receives applause and praise, doesn't happen. And the crowd is upset and they want to kill him. And then you think, okay, well, Paul's going to die. He said in the previous chapter he was ready to die. And yet through this loophole, Paul is allowed to live. And so we see God just reminding us of his sovereignty, that he's the one who's in control. Like you could do things, by the book, and it might not end up with the result that you think it's going to end up with, but I'm still in charge. Right, and that's what I want us to remember as we read through Acts 22 is it's almost like, God is asking us to do what he calls us to do, to share the gospel, to proclaim our testimonies, and yet to understand and remember that ultimately he is in control, and he decides what happens and when it's going to happen. And that's really comforting because it takes the pressure off of me. I don't have to have an elegant sermon on demand. I can just share my testimony. And then I don't have to worry about saying, the right thing to glorify God, but God is going to be glorified in this situation. He is in control. He's the one who laid out this path before me, and I just walk in obedience to him. And so that's my encouragement to you, to understand what is called of you, what is asked of you, and to walk in obedience on that path that he has laid out. God bless. Have a wonderful day.